So this morning, I'm joined by the really lovely Sally Miller. Sal, thank you so much for giving up your time to do this. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to kind of chat through with you to understand your journey to date and some of the wisdom that you've got to pass on to others. So thank you for giving up your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's actually quite refreshing being on this side of the questioning for once, because I'm often interviewing people for a podcast. So
Oh yes, of course, of course. So I'm going to give a really brief overviews, which will help anyone listening, so we can kind of set the scene. So you're an incredible consumer brand marketer. You've worked for some incredible business over the time. So currently CMO of Audi. You've worked in the entertainment space. You've worked in automotive, financial services. There's some really big names there. You were with Sky previously. You worked with Kia, Barclaycard. So and I'm really impressed with what you've delivered over the years in terms of your, your full mix marketer, but very strong on the brand comm side of things, and great at getting that customer engagement. So that will hopefully sort of set the scene for anyone listening in. But what would be great, because I'm curious as to kind of how people listening want to know how this is all fantastic, but how did you get to where you are now? So would you mind just tell us a little bit more about your career journey to date? How did you get here?
yeah, of course. So I probably haven't had, a traditional journey. I was brought up in the country bush in Australia. Literally, we only had a telephone line. We had our own orchard and we had our own electricity and everything. So it was a very rural upbringing, which was quite amazing. We only had sort of 20 people in my primary school. So to suddenly live in London and the 10 million people who live here, it's been a massive transition through my life. I was really fortunate because my parents really believed in education, and they sent me to an amazing secondary school. And I actually specialised in science. So I did chemistry, physics, double maths, English and literature for my A levels. And I went and did a science degree in anatomy and pathology. And I don't think that's a traditional journey into marketing, but I knew sort of in my heart that it wasn't quite where I was meant to be. So I did a lot of soul searching and traveling. And then I decided that I just wanted to get into marketing. And I started off in a direct marketing agency, pretty much as a team assistant, sitting at the desk of everyone saying, teach me everything that I need to know. And from there, I then got an amazing job in an advertising agency, and ended up working on sort of 9 of the biggest beer brands in Australia. And that gave me a real love of big brand advertising. I did campaigns that people still talk about, 20 years later. And it was fast paced, huge amount of fun, and, huge exposure to just how amazing the industry could be. And then I moved to the UK, and I made a very, very deliberate step to move into client side, because I just wanted to get closer to the business and understand more about it, really, rather than being on the agency side. And I was very fortunate in getting the job at Volkswagen, and I worked there for a few years, and really looked after sort of I looked after the large car portfolio, so large car and film, and that meant that I did everything from direct marketing through to sponsorships and events and all of the advertising and things for that as well. And since then I've worked, I've kept that thread running through the rest of my career. So I've worked at Volkswagen, Barclaycard, Kia, and then most recently at Sky when it comes to a corporate role. And there I headed up all of the marketing for Sky Cinema, Sky Sports and Sky Store. So that was brilliant. It was both all of the commercial sort of trading elements, but also all of the brand for each of those areas of the business. And it was a huge role. So it kind of had a team of about 15, and we had huge responsibilities, and as you can imagine, during COVID it was quite a roller coaster, but it was brilliant. And then 3 years ago I left there. I took a bit of a change of direction and decided to try a startup, and that was because I wanted to again sort of really hone my skills in areas that I didn't feel that I was as experienced. So much more in the programmatic space, working in a small company, without the comfort blanket of being in a large corporate. And and it's been a massive learning curve. Like, it's pivoted a few times. I've got under the skin of B2B, and I've sort of kept some of my consumer heartland as well. But it's been an eventful journey to date, but that's kind of got me to where I am now.
Wow, that's incredible. Sort of hearing about your early childhood and then moving to London. That must have been a complete culture shock in every possible way.
Yes, I had a pet emu. So if that just sort of,
I love it.
I
What
know.
was it? Did it have a name? Did you
Yes. Umu. Umu.
Umu
Emu.
the emu?
Yeah.
I love it. Absolutely love it. There's be loads of people putting things like that on Christmas lists now to see if they can also have a pet a pet emu.
I know. It was even unusual at the time, to be fair.
How did you find, you mentioned there, so you worked in the corporate world for some very, very big brands, and then making that transition to a founder-led, fast growth, scale-up environment. How did you make that transit, or how did you find that transition? And anything you'd share with anyone who's also considering going through a similar culture change?
I would actually say it felt like a real culture shock. I think when you're part of a bigger organization, you're surrounded by people who can help you. Like, there are so many people who are there who, whether or not they've got contacts with people, like, you know who to turn to and who to actually collaborate with in order to get things done. You also have a big agency network. So you're used to a lot of people there, and therefore delivery is much faster. The scale of what you can deliver is so much more. And I think the shock when I first came to a startup was actually on my own expectations. I expected that I could still deliver just as much without the team, without the support, without the budget.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to adjust to that. I had to sort of change my own expectations of what success looked like. And that was, yeah, it took a while. I'd say it's still a learning curve, actually. Like, I've been there for 3 years, but I think just because you're so used to ticking things off the list and saying, wow, I've achieved all these things. And in a startup, things do move faster, but they're on a smaller scale. And that's quite different.
Yeah, it is very different. And I've heard many people go through a similar experience in terms of kind of that mental readjustment, I guess, compared to what you've known for those years. What about how you've led your teams to kind of achieve, you talked there about, so it's a very different environment, but how have you led teams to achieve desired or positive outcomes as we've had quite challenging times over the last 2 years in terms of the economy, etc.? Because I know you're brilliant at leading teams. What are your tips and advice that you'd share on that front?
I think that the biggest risk actually for teams at the moment is not being reactive enough. I think that it's so easy to get so stuck in the day-to-day that you just have your head down and you're like, okay, what do I need to do? And I think what that does is it actually risks you alienating your audience or not being reactive enough to what your competitors are doing. And so I've always seen my job as being, okay, the day-to-day is great, but how do I help the team lift their head up and actually keep their head up and aware of what's going on around them, so that they're not missing those opportunities. And I think to do that, I've always set clear expectations and behaviors for how I want the team to operate, and then to give them that right balance of challenge and support, so they know the direction that we need to travel, and to encourage them to be brave and to be bold in those decisions that they're making, so that they've got that psychological safety of knowing that they can make a decision and not risk being penalized for it, and they can be agile themselves. And I think that's where creating that positive working environment's been really, really important to me, and it's how I like to work. So it's how I like to lead teams. And I think beyond the day-to-day, I think it's really important to actually force some of those things onto the team in a nice way, obviously. But whether it's things like customer closeness sessions or innovation workshops, or things that actually make them shut their computer and just think for the day, and be inspired, whether it's an external speaker or whatever it might be, to actually do their day-to-day job better as well, and to think about things a little bit differently.
I like that very much, and particularly the kind of be brave, be bold, and knowing that you're there to support them, but that they've got the kind of the freedom and the safe space to do that. Looking kind of forward in terms of priorities for senior leaders, what, I don't know what's on your sort of list, or what amongst your peer group, what do you think might be some of the key priorities for senior marketing leaders as we come into the next 12-18 months?
I think one of the most obvious things that everyone's talking about and constantly trying to get, to grips with is the impact of AI, what it means for the creative industry. Like, you might have seen sort of Notebook LM that Google's released, and you can now create an entire podcast with 2 people and it sounds authentic and it sounds amazing. The difference is when you get them to do 6 or 7 of them, they all start to sound the same. But it shows the direction of travel, and it shows just how authentic actually AI can become in this space. But I think everyone will start to sound the same. And I think that's a real challenge for marketers, to make sure that you're still cutting through and connecting, and, that you're being differentiating to everyone else, because otherwise we will all start to sound the same, which I don't think is a good thing. But I think, particularly in the current climate, I think one of the biggest challenges is one that we've all known and talked about really for the last 10 years, and that's the Peter Field school of thought of the long and the short of it. I'm constantly having conversations with people who are like, we've got to meet this week's deadlines, or we've got to meet our sales targets for the month. All focus has to be on that. And I think what it's doing is it's risking the longer term view. And I've always focused on really making sure that we're balancing, okay, how are we building our brand metrics and our lifetime value of our customers, not just those sales targets of today. So things like retention and loyalty, how are we going to continue to sort of help improve those constantly? And I think it's happening more and more that the numbers aren't being met, and more people are focusing on how am I going to meet sales targets for today, which means that the sales targets next year will be even harder because the brand won't be as strong. So I think that's a big challenge that we've got. And I'd say there's one other thing. So I was on a DMA panel last week, and it was talking about their new piece of research on loyalty. And one of the things that came out loud and clear, and it's really obvious once you start talking about it, is there's an increasing widening between different generations. So the over 35s and the under 35s. And I think what marketers are really good at doing is honing in on one of those. But what's happening is they're risking alienating huge tranches of the population. They can't maintain relevance somehow to both of them. Obviously, some products will only be targeting one audience or the other. But for big sort of big corporates that are trying to attract both of them, there is a risk that actually we start to lose one of them. And that's when competitors can get in and take up the younger generations or something.
That's an interesting one. I haven't heard that one before. It's nice to have sort of a new suggestion. You mentioned before about the balance between long and short, or short and long term objectives. And certainly what we hear from our senior marketing community at the moment is that's becoming increasingly more challenging, because in times of when it's tough from an economic point of view, and companies are finding it harder to hit those sales targets, that pressure just ramps up, and it does tend to become more and more short-term focused.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting one. I think sometimes it's the way that the team's structured. If you've got people who are purely focusing on just having sales targets, and the acquisition becomes the number that they're striving for. But if everyone also has brand metrics within their personal PDP, and as a team they have to be thinking about the brand at the same time that they're also thinking about the day-to-day, do you think there's a bit of a mindset shift? It does mean that people don't just forget about it. They kind of think about it in the context. I've certainly, when I was at Sky and leading Sky Cinema, and we had it was a declining market. Like, you think about it, Disney Plus has arrived since then. You've got Paramount Plus, you've got like so many of the different streamers, and the entire market is just splintered and has fragmented. And I think that has created a different challenge, because customers only want to spend so much money on their subscriptions, and they're very quick in the current climate to cross the subscription off their list. But what we did for Christmas is we actually put a pure brand lens over the Christmas campaign. And it was the first year we actually had net growth in a declining market. So
Wow.
the short-term sales were met, but 4 out of 6 of the most effective channels were brand. So that includes all of the trading, all of the email comms, all of the different channels, and 4 of the best performing ones were brand from an econometrics perspective. So
That's impressive.
it can be done.
What about advice? Now, so what advice would you explain that kind of the original reason we started doing our Q&A series was that our senior manager and head of candidates who look to aspire to director and chief of level, want to learn. They want the guidance. How did you get to kind of where you are now? So what advice would you pass to anyone who's looking to step up to either a senior marketing director or a CMO role?
I think it's never lose your curiosity. Constantly be asking for questions and learn as much as you can from the people around you. Also, not the most obvious people, because actually, if you just only ask your manager, then you're only going to get one view. So I've been listening to this brilliant book, actually, which is called Likeable Badass. It's about, how women can win in leadership. And it's on Spotify. I'm listening to the audio version because that's just how I like listening to that sort of book. But anyway, one of the things they say is don't just have one mentor. Think about sort of 10 different people and all of the different areas that you might want to learn. So you might want to talk to someone who's more senior. You might want to talk to someone who's from a younger generation. You might want to talk to somebody who's in a leadership position or in different size businesses. But you can learn something from every single person around you. And if you keep that curiosity and kind of constantly think of every conversation as a learning opportunity, you'll come away just constantly just sort of building your own experience and what you can learn. The other sort of 2 things, one is really stay true to yourself. I don't believe that you need to behave in a way that is not true to you in order to achieve. I think the more authentic you are, the more respected you will be. But you need to be able to do it in a way that's that builds your status and helps people understand the value that you can bring. But you don't need to become really nasty if that's not your natural style. Like, be really likable, be a likable badass, be really good at what you're doing. And I think that's why I like that book, actually.
It's a brilliant title. I'm going to download that.
Straight away I'm like, oh, I want to be that.
Yeah.
And then the more I've listened to it, I'm like, oh, I can learn things in here that just different ways of thinking about things that I just hadn't thought about before. Tell people.
I like that concept of having multiple mentors, different perspectives, isn't it? And therefore different areas of learning.
It is, but you also don't know who the sponsor in a company might be. The sponsor for you to get a promotion might not be your direct line manager. It could be somebody who's actually in another department, who is the voice at the table, who goes, yeah, I know her. She's done a really great job at supporting my team or working with my team. Whereas your manager might not have put you forward for that because they just thought that was your job. So yeah, keep an eye on those other people.
That's a really good tip. We'll recommend that book as well. I'm going to download that. We talk a lot on here about positive mindset. It's something I'm a big believer in, and unsurprisingly, everyone who takes part in our Q&A also has a very positive mindset. Are there any hints, tips, habits, rituals, etc., that you follow in order to maintain a positive, or as someone corrected me recently, a growth mindset? So I don't mind which one you want to focus on, but any tips that you would share?
Yeah. generally for me, I would probably say that I'm a pretty positive and optimistic person, so that helps. But I think there've definitely been in times in my career where, you know, it's been harder to maintain that mindset. And so I've always been very conscious of making sure that I look after myself first. To me, that's fresh air, walking, running, going for a bike ride, gardening for hours, or even cooking in the kitchen, like something that is just for me, which I think is really important. I think we sometimes forget about how important that is in the context of work. But I think it's also focusing on the solution rather than the problem. You know, I think sometimes in a work environment, you're so just worried about whatever the problem is that it's harder to then take a step back and think about the solution. And that to me has always been the way that I've identified, you know, how to stay positive and to think about things, because sometimes you can't even see the problem coming, but you can always think of who to call, how to communicate with the team better, or who might be able to solve something. You know, and once you start getting into that mindset, it makes it much easier to then move forward. And I'd say also ruthless prioritization. Sometimes we get really bogged down by the busy work, and focusing on the things that are going to create the most impact is, you know, sometimes you just then deprioritize the things that are less important, and then it means that you can stay positive and thinking about how to do the things that you are doing better. So I think they're probably 3 tools that I use. Generally, I'd say I'm pretty calm in quite crazy situations. I've actually got sort of quite a funny story from when I was at Sky. It's a different campaign to the one that I was talking about earlier. And, you know, when you've got a big budget TV shoot happening, there is generally a level of sort of stress as you're sort of coming into the moment. And COVID added a different layer of stress, because we had a 2-day window with Idris Elba, and there was no flexibility in it because of the 2-week quarantining, and he had to get to a shoot.
Yeah.
And we arrived on the pre-light day for the whole set, and we got told there was asbestos in the building, and that no one was allowed to enter. And it was so interesting seeing everyone's reaction to it. Some people were like complete mayhem and panic, and I was like, we've got experts here, we've got the right people here, that, you know, there's no point panicking, so it's not going to help us at all. So let's make sure that we're giving the people who can make this better the space to be able to work it out and come up with the solution. And by some miracle, they got all sorts of people in overnight, and, you know, we were able to arrive at sort of 7 o'clock the next morning and enter the building. And there was nothing we could do about it, so we had to leave it to other people to help fix the problem. And they did. So they're wonderful. One other, you mentioned positive mindset generally for leaders. We all do sort of various, you know, team building, leadership courses, you know, whatever it might be. And I think one of the ones that has always stuck in my mind, which is absolutely brilliant, is one called the Energy Project.
The Energy Project.
The Energy Project. It's literally called the Energy Project if you Google it. It costs a fortune, so you need to be part of a bigger company. But what they do is they get every single person in the room. And so we had all the senior marketing leaders across Sky all complete these workshops. And what you do is you focus on your own behaviors. So you're focusing on not just the way that your energy is being expressed, but how you create and use your energy yourself, but also how it impacts your team. And so it's quite enlightening when you realize that you're a procrastinator, you know, so you're sort of pushing your stress down the road, and the impact that can have on everyone else. And I think what it showed was you can create like a really sort of sustainable and effective workplace practices just by understanding how each person operates. And everyone came out feeling really energized and really focused on not only how do I, you know, have a more positive mindset, but how do I ensure that every single person in my team does as well. Yeah, it was brilliant. I was looking on their website the other day, and they've got different courses. I'm like, I'd love to do one of them again.
Oh, we're going to have a look in those. Sal, thank you. Brilliant answers. Really, really lovely to catch up. We will share, recommend Likeable Badass, and people can have a look at the energy project as well. But thank you ever so much for your time. It's been a
Pleasure.
joy to chat with you this morning.
You too, Susie. It's been lovely to catch up.